Gun owners continue to wait while more laws are proposed and challenged. How much do major sporting events really impact economies? A preview of Nevada's primary election, the latest unemployment rankings, and state houses debating their impact on taxpayers. This is the Center Square Daily for Friday, June 5th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Justices with the U.S. Supreme Court were in conference Thursday, where they met behind closed doors to discuss which cases they'll choose to take up and hear oral arguments on, which cases they'll deny to take up, and which cases they'll put off for another day. An orders list outlining which cases fall into which category is expected Monday. Despite justices ruling several years ago in a gun control case out of New York, providing more guidance on how courts across the country should rule on gun control measures, gun owners across the country continue to face gun control proposals from their state houses. They continue to watch the latest in court cases that have been in the judiciary for years, and they question what to expect from their elected officials heading into an election year. Joining us to discuss this and some of the latest issues is Kirk Evans, president of U.S. Law Shield. Kirk, thanks for taking time with us here for the Center Square Daily. Let's start with the U.S. Supreme Court. They've been sitting on a series of cases for months, if not longer in some instances. What's your take on why it's taking so long to address critical issues about the litany of gun control challenges?
Sure. The Supreme Court had a really tough reputation for years. They would often go 10, 15 years between actually addressing gun cases. That's sped up a little bit in the past few years, but still sort of painstakingly slow. And the key is you try to pick a case where you can say something that's going to sort of have the most impact, as opposed to picking one state with a strange law that's not going to apply everywhere. You want to have something that has sort of a common meaning, where you can reach a consensus, at least with the majority. That's tough to evaluate, tough to pick out.
And there's a lot of cases out there that they could possibly consolidate. We're talking cases that range from what kinds of firearms can or cannot be banned, where people can carry such firearms, the ages of people who can purchase certain types of firearms. But while we wait for the justices to actually move on some of those things, there's other lawsuits working throughout the judiciary across the country in the lower parts of the judiciary. Just posted this morning, there's one case out of Florida that seems to be resolving. The Florida Attorney General, James Uthmeyer, he tweeted out that every government office, including mine, exists to protect your God-given rights as enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. That's why we're settling a landmark federal case that declares Florida's 3-day firearm purchase wait period unconstitutional under the Second Amendment. Is this a kind of a rare occurrence where a elected official that's meant to uphold and defend certain laws of a state is saying, you know what? Yeah, we're going to go ahead and drop this case or settle?
In the gun-friendly states, you've seen some of the attorneys general and or governors actually do this. So what there'll been a lawsuit pending. This one was pending since 25, but maybe a lawsuit pending since a prior administration, and then the new administration comes in. Although that's not the case in Florida. Comes in and says, hey, wait a minute, this is a pro-gun issue. We're pro-guns. Why are we opposing this anymore? And announces either a settlement or that they'll no longer appeal or no longer fight the case. And that looks like what the AG has done there in Florida. They've decided to settle the challenge to the 3-day waiting period.
What about some of the, what I guess, you characterized as gun-friendly states? What about those states that are unfriendly to guns?
Right. So they're fighting tooth and nail, right? They're almost all of these challenges are brought by pro-gun groups. And so in the gun unfriendly states, you're never going to get those guys to be on board. And there's really no challenges on the other side, on the contrary. So in the gun unfriendly states, they're fighting them tooth and nail.
Of course, that ruling out of New York several years ago from the U.S. Supreme Court, the NYSERPA v. Bruin case, the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association case, I mean, that really kind of, in a way, sent shockwaves across the country that we're still seeing play out today. Have some states just not recognized that with some of the laws that they're proposing and advancing?
No, those states are doing what what DC did, almost 20, 30 years ago in the Heller case. Um, Most of these states or jurisdictions don't take it laying down. If they get, a Supreme Court ruling to the contrary, they go back, take a look at the ruling, try to find all the wiggle room, and try to pass new laws that fit within the wiggle room. And that's what's going on all across the country right now.
In Maryland, Governor Wes Moore recently signed a bill banning the sale of certain types of firearms like Glocks that supporters say is a way to try to urge and nudge gun manufacturers to make safer firearms, especially when it comes to whether or not they're easily converted by using a switch. Switches are already illegal. Does this effort in Maryland address the issues of like inner city violence and the use of these switched handguns?
No, that's correct. So that the switch and having a gun with the switch or an auto sear is already illegal under federal law, serious crime. Um, this is more just sort of overkill. But the worst part is it does make simply having a Glock without the switch, without the sear, the most popular handgun in the country, illegal. Glock, in response to California doing this last year, Glock has already announced an entire line of every single one of their current models has been redesigned so as not to accept the switch or the auto sear. So it's having its intended effect.
And Kirk Evans with U.S. Law Shield joining us to discuss the latest lay of the land of firearm legislation and litigation. Maryland doing this, as you mentioned, California's done it, and I think there's still some legal issues taking place in the courts about California's. But Illinois was poised to do that. They didn't get that across the finish line in Illinois, Kirk.
They did not, and you never know what's going on there. They either didn't have the votes, or even someone internally said, this is one of those that's probably going to get reversed if we're suddenly banning the most popular gun in the entire United States. That might get reversed. Let's stick with things that we think we can win.
But again, as you mentioned, Glock seeming to move towards setting up firearm platforms for handguns that are not going to fit into the category that gun control advocates have of being easily converted from semi-auto to full auto. But another issue in Illinois that we have covered here on the Center Square Daily deals with the firearm owner ID card, which that also has faced legal challenges in the past. There's a fresh federal lawsuit that was filed not too long ago, but the legislators at the state capitol in Illinois, they did pass some changes to that state-issued gun owner ID out of the House. It has not passed the Senate, Kirk. What are your thoughts about this particular piece of legislation, and is it something that kind of highlights there's serious issues when it comes to due process for Illinois' FOID card?
Sure, there are a whole bunch of tough changes. A lot of them sound innocuous, but are frankly rather troubling. The one that sounds innocuous is now, if someone is convicted of a crime, the court clerk is required to report whether or not a firearm involved was stolen. And you think, well, that's good. It seems like something we should tell people if they're bad guys using stolen guns. Well, the kicker is, you can now lose your firearms owner ID card in Illinois if you fail to report a stolen gun, and you can ratchet up, severe penalties for multiple failures to report a stolen gun. So, the concern is, are we really doing the right thing here, or are we now just going to, start tracking down all the people who've been the victim of theft and had their guns stolen?
And the civil liability they could face in Illinois if that firearm is used in some kind of crime. Definitely a question a lot of people in Illinois are watching. But we have other issues like in Virginia. There's an ongoing legal fight, as the Center Square has reported, about background checks. And you've got gun rights groups accusing the state of violating a court order by restarting background checks. It's interesting, back in October, a law was previously found to be unconstitutional as applied to adults age 18 to 20, and they struck it down entirely, but lawmakers came back and passed House Bill 1525. ultimately restoring those background checks. Kirk, there's already background checks done on a federal level, correct? For those who don't understand what it takes to actually go and purchase a firearm, what does that process look like?
Sure. You go into a federal firearms licensee, and you have to fill out what's called a 4473. Has a whole bunch of information, and it's a crime, to lie on the 4473. But it asks if you've been convicted of certain crimes, or have mental disabilities, all sorts of things like that. And then you go through what's called a NICS background check, and they run it through. And if they can quickly and immediately determine that you pass the background check, you typically get your gun. If they can't, then there's a waiting period where they get to do more diligence. And if they don't come back with a negative by a certain amount of time, then you get your gun. Virginia decided, well, not only are we going to make folks go through that, but we're going to do our own background check system, not only at FFLs, but on all firearms transactions, even giving one to your next door neighbor.
So with that, obviously, the question is, are these, state level background checks on top of federal background checks necessary?
It's more of a headache. Really, the problem is, the real problem is the state, or does the state have some info that it's not passing on to the NICS system? Is there something at a local level that maybe we could make for it more efficient? Nobody wants, a multiple convicted felon to, run out and get a gun. Why aren't we getting all that information into the federal system? And, why do we need duplicative things that are just going to delay guns for folks who should have them?
Kirk Evans, president of U.S. Law Shield. We've covered a lot of ground here, but to wrap things up, what are some things that gun owners across the country should really have on their radar?
If you're in, what I was call a gun unfriendly state, every year there are new laws that are banning, quote unquote, assault weapons, large capacity magazines, and things like that. And they are very, very detailed. Some have grandfathering. The Maryland law doesn't ban let's say the possession of the Glock, just merely the sale or transfer. So you might say, oh, I'll just go out of state and transfer this handgun to someone in another state, and I can get rid of it. You can't do that. You can't sell to a person in another state a handgun. Anyway, my point with all of that is these laws are very, very detailed. There's tons of ins and outs. As they get passed, make sure you know the law, talk to an attorney before you do anything, and try to stay on the right side of the law.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that could take a little bit of research, especially with 50 different states and 50 different laws concerning firearms, some that are very restrictive, others that aren't. But obviously, it's part of the makeup and the fabric of this country, and we'll be watching to see what happens. Kirk Evans, president of U.S. Law Shield, greatly appreciate you taking the time here with the Center Square Daily. What kinds of benefits are you, the taxpayer, going to get from stadiums across the country hosting an international soccer tournament? That's a question many are pondering, as taxpayer resources may be devoted to helping facilitate the World Cup. Now, next Thursday, World Cup matches kick off in Mexico City and Guadalajara. But June 12th, Los Angeles will host the USA versus Paraguay match. Then it's consecutive days of matches in Boston, New York, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Houston, Dallas, Miami, Atlanta, Seattle, and Kansas City. Matches are scheduled throughout the month of June. The finals begin July 18th in Miami for the bronze finish, and the gold match taking place in New York, New Jersey Stadium, July 19th. Now, 8 World Cup games will be played in Georgia's capital city, beginning June 15th with a match between Spain and Cabo Verde. In Georgia, the Center Square Associate Editor Kim Jarrett reports the chief economist for the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce authored a 2024 analysis estimating a $503.2 million impact on the state of Georgia based on out-of-state visitors alone. Now, the report said the World Cup is a unique event that attracts a wildly enthusiastic fan base, but there are questions about the true economic impact. Victor Matheson talked with Kim Jarrett. He's from the College of the Holy Cross, and he said there's reasons that there may not be as much of an economic boon as some have estimated.
Most of the people who are going to be in that stadium in Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz Stadium are going to be locals, right? You can't fill a 75,000-seat stadium for every game, especially when you're talking about some very small countries with small fan bases coming. And so that means most of the tickets are going to be bought by local residents. And they're just going to be spending their money at the Mercedes-Benz Arena stadium rather than elsewhere in the local Georgia economy. So the money that gets spent there is not increasing the total size of my entertainment budget, which means I have to cut back on Braves tickets, on Atlanta United tickets, on hot dogs at this great place right north of downtown Atlanta that I've been to. These sort of things, the amount of the money I spend one place is money that's not available to spend elsewhere. That's what's known as the substitution effect.
Now, Matheson said that massive economic boon will be for FIFA, who organizes the World Cup. They stand to make $10 billion to $11 billion on the event. Now, joining us to talk more about questions surrounding the economic impact of such events, someone who's watching this very closely across the country, the Center Square reporter John Styf. John, thanks for taking time with us. From what you've gathered looking into the impacts of professional sports and other entertainment venues across the country, World Cup aside, are there economic impacts for the taxpayers for these types of events?
There certainly are. People go to the events, people are going to spend money at the events, but the problem is what's pitched versus what actually occurs. There's these big numbers that you see heading into an event because local officials want to bring that event there. They feel like it makes them important. It makes the city important. It gets the city's name out there. The problem is that those numbers never come to fruition. One of the biggest things that happens is hotel prices get jacked up, and other people who would normally go visit a city like Atlanta or even Chicago this weekend when they play a friendly match against Germany wouldn't necessarily go to that city because they look at the hotel prices and they've gone through the roof. Conventions don't want to go to Atlanta during the World Cup. Other things like that just kind of move out of the way or schedule for a different time of year.
How much are taxpayers assisting with these types of events? I would imagine there's got to be a security component. We've heard even the White House talking about how security for the World Cup is going to be great. It's going to be the best security ever. But there's got to be a taxpayer cost to all of this.
There's huge taxpayer costs. There were taxpayer costs on the front end of this trying to bring in these events. A city like Nashville that didn't even get the event spent money trying to lure it there and saying, hey, we have a new football stadium. We want to have matches here. So there's a wide-ranging cost, both in expanding transit and in that security that you're talking about in the downtown areas, because it's not only the matches, but they shut down different areas of the downtowns for events around the World Cup matches.
We heard the economist earlier talk about just one area where he says it might not be the boost that everybody's looking for because, it's going to be more local people who are already spending entertainment dollars there. And some of these matches may be from countries that are tiny and people aren't going to travel from that country all the way to Atlanta or all the way to LA or New York or Guadalajara or wherever these matches are taking place. That's just one criticism I haven't really thought about. What are some other things that taxpayers and those in these local economies across the country should consider whenever they see those road closures, the enhanced police presence, the hotels that are jacked up in prices, and the long waits at various restaurants? What should they be thinking about?
Well, it's not different than the NFL draft, which was recently in Pittsburgh, and all the businesses there were promised, "Hey, we're gonna have a bunch of people come to town. They're gonna go to this thing." And what actually happened is it was a bunch of local people. They stayed within kind of the guardrails of the NFL draft, and they didn't venture out to other areas of Pittsburgh. Same thing happened when Las Vegas brought in the F1 race. They shut down the strip. They shut down all the roads there, and they told the businesses, "Hey, you're going to get a lot more people," but they actually got less because it was really hard to get to things. Because not unlike a political convention like you've been to in Milwaukee, they shut down a huge area around it, and it's really hard to get into those things. It's not necessarily bringing more people there. There's a lot of deterrence because of all the literal guardrails that are up, and people saying, "Well, you can't come here for security reasons."
Definitely something to consider as we see these games starting up all throughout the country for the World Cup. And John, I don't even watch sports, but I know that as taxpayers look at this, whether or not you watch sports, there might be some impact on you in your local jurisdiction. Greatly appreciate you taking the time with us here for the Center Square Daily. Now it's time for Square Up the Votes with a preview of one race that the team from the Center Square will be watching closely Tuesday. North Carolina, South Dakota, and Nevada voters head to the polls next week. Voting centers in Nevada have opened, and they're open through today across the state. Voters can also submit a mail-in ballot throughout the state's universal mail-in ballot program, with polls opening Tuesday from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. But what's at stake in Nevada? Well, Nevada's gubernatorial primaries, just a teaser of what the competition's going to be like come November 3rd for the general midterm election. It's expected to be decided by narrow margins in this swing state. Now, Governor Joe Lombardo has faced minimal significant opposition to the Republican Party nomination, as State Attorney General Aaron Ford headlines the pack of Democratic candidates. But both primaries are packed with candidates. There are 7 Republicans altogether and 6 Democrats. Now, Lombardo and Ford, they've traded verbal blows for months, taking opposition on stances about Trump and the administration, while also straining to present the most popular economic agenda amid the national rallying cry around affordability. But while polls have often featured Lombardo and Ford neck and neck, you got Democratic candidate and Washoe County Commissioner Alexis Hill seeking to remind voters that there are more options on the ballot. Hill has challenged Ford to a primary debate in the past, while Ford previously responded to questions of a debate by saying he was focused on talking to voters one-on-one. Other major issues debated by the various candidates have included mining, election security. You've also got voting rights and data centers that are very much top of mind of these politicians. Now, candidates for Nevada's open attorney general seat, they're debating around President Donald Trump, corruption, reproductive rights, immigration, and voting rights. But mainly, they're debating over who has the right experience to get the job done. Now, the current Attorney General, Aaron Ford, a Democrat, he's run up against his term limit and is running for governor, as we mentioned. But as the primary campaign draws to a close, one Republican candidate has received endorsements from the Republican governor, Joe Lombardo, and from the president. Now, while Democratic backing has largely been split, State Senate's Majority Leader, Nicole Canizaro, a Democrat from Las Vegas, and State Treasurer Zach Conan, they're running against each other in that Democratic primary. Now, in the Republican primary, it's Douglas County Commissioner Danny Tarkanian against lawyer Adriana Guzman-Fralick. Now, Fralick's received endorsements from both Trump and from the governor. Again, this is going to be a contested race that we'll be watching with the team from the center square, and we'll have that comprehensive coverage of Nevada's primary election Tuesday. Get details at thecentersquare.com. Are you looking for a job? If so, you're included in the latest unemployment statistics. But how does your state rank? Now, the U.S. economy added 172,000 jobs in May's better than expected report, while the unemployment rate remained at 4.3%, according to data released by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Now, the Bureau revised its April numbers, increasing to 179,000 jobs, and March increased by 214,000 jobs. What kind of jobs are there gains in? The hospitality sector showed the most growth in May, with an increase of 70,000 jobs throughout the month throughout the country. Local governments also seeing job gains. They had about 55,000 jobs added all across the country. Now, some are saying it looks like the hiring recession is over, while almost every industry is hiring again except for the technology and finance sectors. However, wage growth over the last year, ending in May 2026, was 3.4%, and that's the lowest the U.S. economy has seen in the last 5 years. But where does your state stand on its unemployment rate? If you look at some of the latest data from the U.S. Labor Statistics Bureau, you'll see South Dakota has the lowest unemployment rate at 2.2%, North Dakota at 2.4%, Hawaii 2.5%, Vermont 2.6%, and Alabama 2.8%. Now, the bottom 5 states and jurisdictions, the District of Columbia at 6.2%, at 5.3%, Nevada, Delaware, California, and Washington landing in the bottom 5. Oregon at 5.2%, Illinois at 5.1%, and Michigan and Connecticut at 5%. Now, one number to consider as part of the equation is the labor force participation rate. That's different from the unemployment rate. The labor force participation rate is the number of people in the workforce as a percentage of the civilian non-institutional population. The percentage rate is the percentage of the population that is either working or actively looking for work. Now, as of May, the number is 61.8% for that labor force participation rate. That's down from last year's rate of 62.6%. So we'll keep you posted on the economy as these latest numbers released this week. Every week, new unemployment data will be released. We'll compare and contrast how well states are doing or how poorly they're doing here with the Center Square Daily. Let's now get into America's Talking with State House moments from across the country. In Michigan, State Representative Jason Wolford supported House Bill 5813 to provide more transparency for taxpayers around the state's Medicaid error rate.
I rise in support of House Bill 5813. This bill requires MDHHS to annually report Michigan's Medicaid error rate and improper payment rate to the public and this legislature. The purpose is simple: transparency. Transparency on nearly $20 billion. Michigan spends billions of taxpayer dollars through Medicaid every year. Taxpayers deserve to know how accurately those funds are being administered. Most importantly, the taxpayers as well. Far too long, error rates have been discussed internally while the public remains largely unaware of the scope of these improper payments. In 2021, federal audits have found Medicaid improper payment rates have exceeded nearly 20% nationally. And whether those payments result from fraud, administrative mistakes, or eligibility errors, taxpayers have the right to know. This bill does not reduce benefits, it doesn't cut funding, and it doesn't change eligibility. It simply requires reporting.
Now, a recent payment error rate results report from Michigan found areas for improvements in the overall issue. The ARC Michigan, they report the state had a 6.1% error rate for Medicaid. Now, for 2024, the national Medicaid improper payment rate for several states and several years was estimated at around 5%, and that translates to more than $31 billion in error rates. Now, is some of that fraud? Could be, but could also just be simply an error. And as with the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program error rate, that includes whether or not there's overpayments or underpayments. Keep an eye on that out of Michigan and elsewhere. At the New York State Senate, debate was had about how that state goes about redistricting political maps. Republican New York State Senator Mario Matera, he criticized the measure that was in front of the assembly and the impact, he said, that it's going to have on taxpayers.
This bill is nothing but gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is dividing our country. It promotes safe seats that encourage politicians to pander to their bases that vote in low-turnout primary elections. Gerrymandering rigs general elections, dilutes the will of the voters, carves up communities with shared interests, and incentivizes polarization instead of collaboration, said Problem Solvers Caucus co-chairman Congressman Tom Suozzi. That just says it all. I guess nobody in this whole room did not talk to Congressman Tom Suozzi. You know, when I first got here, there it was for 2 years. Then all of a sudden, the 10 years that you have the seats, get changed. The district lines get changed. And you know what happens? It gets changed, and the gerrymandering happened. We know what happened. You had to have the special masters that the taxpayers in New York State had to pay for gerrymandering. Company, there it was, out of Pennsylvania, guess what? That has to redraw lines.
Now, the issue of gerrymandering and legislative boundaries and congressional boundaries has very much been a hot topic this election year, with some states changing their maps and others not, but all in an effort to try to gain seats in Congress for one party over the other. In the Texas State House, Democratic State Representative Christian Manuel, he questioned a measure that was being debated that would look to fine local governments who don't remove certain ordinances from their books. Manuel said that's just going to mean more taxpayer costs for the city to pay fines out of taxpayer resources to the state.
I don't understand why we're taking a precedent of putting fines that are going to be put off on taxpayers, and they already feel like people in government aren't listening to them. Now, I'm not saying that the mask mandate was perfect. I'm not saying that everybody did everything perfect during COVID. We know they didn't. We know some people do like to go to a pulpit and they like to put their brand of justice on everybody. I get that. I understand reining that in. I personally do, right or left. But my biggest issue is, why are we punishing the people who literally don't have anything to do with that? And their cities are already cash-strapped. They can't just increase taxes anymore without getting another additional fine. And we're doing this because they have ordinances that are on the books. I'm trying to see how it's not hypocritical that we can have these laws and we're not going to fine ourselves, but we will fine these cities and we will make their constituency pay for them. But then I'm also wondering how are they going to pay that if they can't increase the taxes because we made that illegal this past session. So I'm not seeing how this is helping.
And to get away a little bit from debates around certain types of policies impacting taxpayers, in the California Senate, a taxpayer advocacy group was honored on the Senate floor.
Joining me today to celebrate California Taxpayers Association's 100th anniversary are Robert Gutierrez, President of the California Taxpayer Association, and John Schmalak, Chair of CalTax Board of Directors. CalTax is California's oldest and largest taxpayer advocacy organization and has been advocating for sound tax policy and government efficiency since 1926. Organizations like CalTax play an important role in ensuring that taxpayer dollars are spent responsibly and tax policies are fair and predictable for all Californians. CalTax was founded on nonpartisan and non-political principles so the association could bring about the greatest possible economies consistent with efficiency in the collection and expenditure of public monies. CalTax has always supported policies that promote transparency, fairness, and accountability in tax laws. This includes one of their earliest victories in which they played a key role in legislation that required counties to prepare formal budgets, providing transparency for all Californians.
And that's just some of what's happening in the past week at state houses all across the country. Get your state and national newsletters by signing up for free at thecentersquare.com. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. You can join us back here Monday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from all around the country, only with the Center Square Daily.